South Korea is now fully back on Japan's list of trusted trading partners as Tokyo today revised a rule on this about 4 years after a trade dispute was triggered by a forced labor compensation ruling in 2018. Facilitating a business-friendly environment through the cutting of red tape and ramping up diplomacy. That's what President Yoon underscored today as he related the gains from his recent trips to France and Vietnam. And a robot now takes on a new challenge. We have a glimpse of a special orchestra performance conducted by a robot. It's June 27th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. Korea is now fully back on Japan's list of trusted trading partners as Tokyo today revised a related rule 4 years after its removal. The change will take effect later next month with expectations that it'll boost trade between the two countries. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young starts us off.
It's taken about 4 years for the trade dispute between South Korea and Japan to be resolved. According to Seoul's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, the country will be back on Tokyo's whitelist of trading partners for the first time since 2019. On Tuesday, the Japanese Trade Ministry decided to reinstate South Korea as a Group A or whitelist nation, which will take effect starting July 21st, giving Seoul benefits from simplified export procedures. Back in July 2019, Japan placed export restrictions on 3 critical industrial materials used by South Korean companies to manufacture chips and displays following a ruling in South Korea regarding reparations for wartime forced labor victims. It also removed Seoul from its whitelist, triggering a strong backlash. In response, South Korea filed a complaint to the WTO alleging discriminatory actions contrary to the world body's rules. The latest decision comes amid a move to improve bilateral economic relations. Following a summit between South Korea and Japan in March, Tokyo lifted export restrictions, prompting Seoul to respond by dropping its WTO complaint and placing Japan back on its whitelist. After Tokyo's decision on Seoul's trade status, procedural convenience is expected to be enhanced for Japanese companies exporting strategic items to South Korea. Group A countries are also immune from a catch-all regulation, a screening system for exports of parts and materials that could be used for military purposes. Seoul's Trade Ministry welcomed the move, saying that trust between the two countries in export controls has been completely recovered. It also added that it will cooperate with Tokyo on other bilateral and multilateral export control issues. Meanwhile, South Korean companies anticipate a positive impact on supply chain stability, particularly in the chip industry. They also expect the resolution of uncertainty in the economic relationship between Seoul and Tokyo, leading to an expansion of exchanges between the two countries. On the other hand, some expect that restoration to the whitelist will have little or no significant impact on the industry, as the country had already diversified its supply chains in response to Japan's export restrictions. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Facilitating a business-friendly environment through cutting red tape and ramping up diplomacy. That's according to President Yoon today as he underscored the gains from his recent sales diplomacy in France and Vietnam. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
President Yoon Suk-yeol looked back on his trips to Paris and Hanoi last week and said his role as the nation's #1 salesman is paying off. Speaking on Tuesday in a live public address, Yoon cited the $940 million investment from European companies during his visit to Paris, as well as the 111 MOUs signed between Vietnam and South Korea.
글로벌 복합 위기를 극복하고 대외 의존도가 높은 우리 경제의 성장을 이어가기 위해 그동안 대한민국 영업사원으로서 경제 외교, 세일즈 외교를 적극 펼쳐왔습니다.
The European companies that committed investment to South Korea include auto parts, batteries, and wind turbine firms, while the MOUs signed in Vietnam include cooperation in rare earth materials and the space industry. South Korea attracted foreign investment of $16.5 billion in the first half of this year, the highest in history for the period. President Yoon said that success came down to more than just his sales diplomacy.
이 같은 대규모 투자 유치는 세일즈 외교, 또 한미 관계, 한일 관계 개선의 노력과 함께 규제를 대대적으로 풀어 기업이 필요로 하는 제도적 환경을 조성했기 때문에 가능한 일이라고 생각합니다.
President Yoon vows that the government will continue supporting businesses so they can operate as they wish. Also, saying the inflation and trade deficit situations have shown improvements despite the global economic crisis. President called on the cabinet to make sure South Koreans feel the economic improvements in the upcoming second half of the year. In the meantime, he also re-emphasized his motivation to host the 2030 World Expo in Busan. Looking back at his BIE presentation in Paris, he thanked those who were involved, including K-pop icon Psy and the chief architect Ko Jin-young. He also said the country is working on more than 1,200 official development assistance programs for the BIE member states, all catered to their needs. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Millions of North Koreans are in dire need of humanitarian assistance, and pundits say an effective support framework requires transparency from that regime. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Kim Mo-gyun reports.
More than 10 million people living in North Korea are in need of humanitarian assistance. That's according to the Voice of America, citing the British Development Initiative's Global Humanitarian Assistance Report for the year 2023. The report says that as of last year, some 10,400,000 residents in the North are in need of external support, meaning North Korea ranks 14th on the list of countries with the most people in need. The regime has been listed along with Syria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, and Venezuela as having more than 10 million people suffering from humanitarian crisis since 2019. It has also been classified by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's IPC standards as being at level P3+. IPC stands for the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, a set of standards used to classify the severity and magnitude of food insecurity. Phase 3 means that some 20% of households are not consuming enough food and have high levels of malnutrition. North Korea has been consistently non-transparent regarding the level of humanitarian aid required there, despite the regime experiencing chronic food shortages over the past years. And for the situation to improve, experts say the North must allow international aid organizations to help, especially when it comes to providing food.
The outlook is rather bleak, and North Korea needs to both increase its revenue and imports from China, as well as to try to consider letting in humanitarian assistance by ensuring that humanitarian organizations are allowed to ensure that food goes to those who need it.
And in the case of the international community, Seoul's ambassador for North Korea's human rights says more efforts should be done to raise awareness of the dire human rights situation in the reclusive state so that the global community can find ways to provide more assistance for its people.
So for that, probably we international community and including the South Korea should raise the importance and the significance of why and how we can address the North Korean human rights abuses.
Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
China and Russia say that the inability to address North Korea's security concerns in a balanced manner is what's causing tensions on the Korean peninsula. Liu Xiaoming, the representative of the Chinese government on Korean Peninsula affairs, and Andrei Ludenko, Russia's deputy foreign minister, reportedly met on Monday in Beijing and held an in-depth discussion about the Korean Peninsula. The two noted that 70 years have passed since the armistice of the Korean War, but there hasn't been a transition from armistice to peace. They agreed that realizing denuclearization on the peninsula is in the common interest of the region and the international community, stressing the need for efforts by relevant parties to achieve lasting peace. Today, we talk about the issue that's been making headlines here for weeks. addressing overheated private education market. Discussions have been heating up over how the college entrance exam is driving demand for private education. For more on this issue, we have our reporter Song Yoo-jin joining us in the studio. Evening, Yoo-jin.
Good evening, Jung-min.
First of all, how did this discussion begin?
Well, Jung-min, I think we first have to talk about Korea's college entrance exam, often known as Suneung here in South Korea. And this test, it pretty much determines what kind of university the test takers will enter next year. So it's kind of become one of the most important and pivotal days and events for students here in South Korea. And this test is held every November, but it's preceded by 2 mock tests in June and September. But there have been quite a lot of talks on certain test questions, difficult and complex ones, that are often referred to as killer questions here in the country that go beyond the scope of the school curriculum. And President Yoon himself has expressed concerns about them and how they contribute to the continuous demand for private education from earlier this year. Then, after this year's June mock test, which took place on June 1st, proved to be quite difficult, President Yoon urged the education minister to get rid of these so-called killer questions in future Suneung exams and mock tests as well.
So the president and the government see challenging Suneung questions as will lead to an increase in private education. So can you explain why this happens and tell us more about spending on private education?
Well, that's because cram schools, which are called hagwons here in Korea, they really specialize in teaching students how to really solve these killer questions quickly and also accurately. And this can be seen by a survey conducted by the Education Ministry last month, which said that the primary reason, 45% of the parents who were surveyed answered that the reason why they're trying to send their students, their kids, to hagwons is to better and fully prepare them for a college entrance exam for Suneung. And so private education spending in South Korea has been rising consistently. It's become one of the biggest businesses here in Korea. And you can see that from numbers. According to data from Statistics Korea, last year, monthly spending per student on private education reached 410,000 Korean won, which is around $314, marking the highest level since data was first compiled in 2007. But I want to say that this is only the average because hagwons here in Korea often specialize in one subject like English or math. So for example, if one student goes to 3 to 4 hagwons, for example, English, math, or piano, then you can pretty much imagine how much these costs will snowball. And this hagwon and private education spending market here in Korea, it's not a 1 or 2 day thing because in 2012, a report by the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment showed that Korean students spent an average of 3.6 hours per week in private education, which was the longest amongst OECD countries and 6 times the bloc's average. And Jung-min, I want to say that the main reason why the government is trying to tackle and reduce spending on private education is not only because it widens the education gap as underprivileged students cannot afford it, but it could also worsen the already low birth rate problem here in Korea. And you can see this from another survey as well. It was conducted by the Korean Educational Development Institute last year. It found out that 49% of parents answered private education expenses as one of the most significant burdens when they're trying to raise a child.
So what is being done here?
Well, first of all, yesterday on Monday, the Education Ministry actually rolled out a couple of measures to really curb the private education spending here in country. And first of all, it revealed 22 killer questions that it selected over the last 3 years, Suneung and the mock test from this month, June. And this was to really show how difficult these questions are and to show that these questions will not appear in future mock tests in Suneung as well. But it was not only this because the ministry rolled out a couple of more measures to really curb private education spending. So let's first take a listen at what the education minister had to say.
The reason why we're unveiling these killer questions is to show that we'll remove all such questions from future tests that go beyond the realm of public education. For this, we will establish advisory and screening panels composed of school teachers to oversee the exam questions.
So it's not only this, so for next year, most Suneung test writers will be comprised of school teachers who are currently teaching students, and this is quite a big change from the current roster, as right now, almost more than half of the test writers are actually university professors. To give you the exact number, 55%, and the ministry also promised to crack down on private education institutes, cram schools that really engage in false or exaggerated advertising to really attract more parents and students to enroll in these institutions.
A lot has been announced, so how effective will these measures be?
Well, I talked to a couple of experts in the industry, and they said that these measures that the Education Ministry unveiled yesterday was a meaningful start, but there is definitely room for more. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
Reducing the prominence of private education will be challenging without addressing the highly competitive atmosphere in South Korea, where it's life or death to enter prestigious universities. Although it may be difficult, the government should focus on the long-term goal of establishing universities outside the capital region to eliminate the existing university hierarchy.
Unlike regular in-school tests, the Special Act on the Promotion of Public Education Normalization and Regulation on Pre-Curriculum Education doesn't say the Suneung exam should not include questions that go beyond the school curriculum. There should be legal standards and measures, like amending the law to include the Suneung exam as well.
So I want to say that there's definitely need for more future countermeasures as well.
All right, thank you for your roundup, Eugene.
Thank you.
South Korea's lunar orbiter Danuri will operate for 2 years longer than expected, as it used less power than was planned on its journey to the moon. The Ministry of Science and ICT announced this on Tuesday, saying the orbiter will continue its mission until the end of 2025. It also explained that data obtained by the space vehicle will be used to create a 3D map of the moon that will help identify potential landing sites for future missions. The data will also be used to make a map detailing the elements and resources present on the lunar surface. Danuri, which has been orbiting the moon since last December, was originally scheduled to operate for just 12 months until the end of this year. Now that it will operate for 2 more years, it will be tasked with taking more videos of the lunar surface. A robot now takes on a new challenge as it's about to debut as a conductor for the first time in Korea. Our Ko Jin-young went to a rehearsal and caught the moment of its unveiling.
Can a robot replace a conductor? It all begins with this simple question. On the National Orchestra of Korea, in association with the Korea Institute of Industrial Technology, will be looking to provide the answer when a conducting robot named EVA-6 leads an orchestra for the first time in South Korea on June 30th. Expectations were high at Monday's rehearsal, and as EVA-6 began its performance of Horse Thumb, composed by Mevriva, all eyes were on whether the robot would function as a huge metronome or more like a real-life conductor. The highlight of the rehearsal was the performance of Kam, an improvisational piece between the human conductor Soo Choi and EVA-6, who both lead the orchestra together. Conductor Choi directed orchestra members to play music at the exact moment he believed to be right, while EVA-6 helped him to maintain the beat and rhythm.
This piece lets you experience the process of completion and interaction between performers and conductors. The actual notes are not crucial, but you can see the communication between them.
Conducting robots, such as Japan's Ashimo in 2008 and Switzerland's Yumi in 2017, have already astounded the music world, and the Institute has also devoted years of effort to developing the 6th version of its humanoid robot ever.
We focus on humanoid robots resembling humans to enable effective communication, as future robots aim to assist us in daily life. Conducting itself needs rapid light-speed gestures. prompting efforts to resolve this issue in response to the National Theatre's proposal.
According to the composer of Come and the robot's co-conductor, Eva 6 is not actually conducting, despite its superior accuracy and rhythm compared to humans. They pointed out Eva 6's inability to listen as its major weakness.
I believe Ever 6 is more of a conductor performer than a conductor, as it guides and performs gestures, while the performers respond through listening, confirming, correcting, and interpreting the music to create their desired expression.
The question posed by Ever 6 about a future society where people coexist with robots is clear. It is possible for art to expand in a realm that was once considered exclusive to humans. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
South Korean LPGA star Ko Jin-young has set a new record for the most career weeks spent at the top of the women's world rankings. Ko has been top for 159 weeks, surpassing the previous record set by Mexican gold legend Lorena Ochoa in 2010. The 15-time LPGA Tour winner's average ranking points of 8.31 is well above world number 2 Nelly Korda with 7.45. Ko first reached the number 1 spot in 2019 after her first major victory at the ANA Inspiration. Previously, her longest reign at the top had spanned 100 weeks from July 29, 2019 to June 27, 2021. In other news, rays of sunshine were evident in the capital city today as the monsoon here notes a brief lull to make way for the summer heat. Elsewhere in the southern parts of the country, though, downpours continued. Our Lee Soo-jin has the weather update.
Temperatures are set to jump in South Korea in areas seeing respite from this season's monsoon rain. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, central regions, including Seoul, will see a lull in downpours as the rain has moved south. Southern regions are currently experiencing rainfall of up to 10 millimeters per hour, accompanied by thunder and lightning. And rainfall of 200 millimeters or more is expected on Jeju Island, and at least 120 millimeters is predicted for Chungcheongdo provinces today. Precipitation in the south is forecasted to continue until Wednesday. Temperatures in areas where the rain has temporarily stopped will rise significantly during the day, with temperatures reaching 28 degrees Celsius in Seoul and 32 degrees in Daegu. Feels like temperatures will be even more, and it will feel uncomfortably muggy with the added humidity from all the rain. Heavy monsoon rain is expected nationwide again towards the end of the week. South Korea's monsoon typically lasts around a month and brings rainfall ranging from between 350 and 500 millimeters, around 1/3 of the country's annual rainfall. The amount of rainfall has surged in recent years, however, with the frequency of torrential downpours of 30 millimeters or more per hour increasing by more than 20% since the beginning of the 2000s. In addition, while in the past rainfall was mostly concentrated in the monsoon season, in recent summers there has been more rain after the end of the monsoon in August. This summer, the nation is expected to see even more precipitation after the monsoon season ends due to the effects of the El Niño weather pattern. The Korea Meteorological Administration said many areas may experience heavy downpours as late in the year as into the fall, and urged people in areas that are especially prone to flooding to continue to remain alert. Meanwhile, President Yoon during his cabinet meeting emphasized the importance of minimizing any casualties that may occur from flooding during the monsoon season. He also called on his cabinet to promptly issue flood warnings for vulnerable facilities and areas and to prepare quick evacuation routes. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
monsoonal rain front will keep dropping showers for parts of the south. Jeju Island will continue to see heavy downpours. Expect up to 150 millimeters until tomorrow. For parts of the south coast, up to 70 millimeters are expected. Due to continuous rainfall, the ground is very saturated. Please take extra precautions against potential landslides or flooding. Daytime highs will soar again tomorrow. Most regions will see maximum temperatures hovering around 30 degrees Celsius or higher. The heat will cause unstable atmospheric conditions, which will bring scattered outbreaks of rainfall for inland regions. In the meantime, parts of eastern regions are under heat wave alerts. Parts of Gyeongsang-do provinces are under advisories, which means that sensible temperatures will exceed 33 degrees. Under such extreme heat, dehydration and other heat-related illnesses may occur, so drink plenty of water and try to stay indoors. Tomorrow, Seoul and Busan will be starting off at 22 degrees. Highs in Seoul and Chuncheon will get up to 30 degrees. Daejeon 31. Busan will be reaching 27 degrees Celsius. Another monsoonal rain front will enter the country this coming Thursday. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for this evening. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
제주도에 처음에 놀러 갔을 때 새롭게 단장했다고 이야기를 해드리도록 할게요. 스트릿 사진 현장이었는데 좋은 건축을 한국인들만의 마음들.
같이 갈래요?
오지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손잡아요.
Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Anticipation rose with a rare high-level engagement between two of the world's superpowers. From Washington, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Chinese President Xi Jinping, during which they agreed to keep communication channels open. However, there are lingering frictions remaining on a range of issues, including Taiwan. U.S. President Joe Biden calling his Chinese counterpart a dictator has merely added fuel to the fire. Would this opening of a communication channel de-escalate tensions between the two? And how would it affect Seoul's position? For an in-depth analysis, we invite Professor Pyo Nari from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Now, Professor Pyo, President Xi said the two sides have agreed to follow on from the common understandings that were reached with United States President Joe Biden in Bali last year. What consensus was reached back then?
Good evening, and thanks for having me on. And, President Biden and President Xi Jinping have met in Indonesia, Bali, just you mentioned it, on last year, November 14th, and they both been to the summit, G20 Summit 2022. And actually, it was Biden's first in-person meeting with Xi Jinping. And on that meeting, President Biden mentioned that U.S.-China competition should not veer into conflict. And actually, both those two countries have responsibility to manage the recent competition. And of course, President Xi Jinping answered that they need cooperation to take concrete actions to put U.S.-China relations back on the track of steady development. But at the same time, they have also found themselves at odds over issues like Taiwan or human rights in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. And also U.S. export bans on advanced semiconductor technology, and of course, North Korean nuclear issues. So still, these remain areas of intention agreement. And plus, actually back then, they also agreed that Secretary of State Blinken's visit to Beijing for the follow-up discussions in Bali.
Right, I see. But that did not happen because of the spy balloon incident, as far as I know. And because of those issues, I believe we could say the U.S.-China thaw indeed is fragile. However, though there are some aspects both needs to settle down, China does seem to recognize the necessity of reopening high-level communications in order to stabilize bilateral ties. How is China seeing the relations with the U.S. right now?
Yes. Well, we all have pre-motion that U.S.-China competition cannot continue forever because those two countries are the biggest country in the world, and they're great powers and the strongest countries. And of course, they're not under a war situation. So it's impossible to compete each other, forever. So it was, I think, just a matter of sooner or later. And actually, there were some signals since last year. For example, we just talked about the G20 summit in Bali 2022. And at that time, China agreed to accept Blinken's visit to Beijing, as I mentioned. And from China's side, also promised that Wang Yi and He Lifeng, high officials, will accompany to the follow-up discussions when the Blinken visits Beijing. And there's another signal this year. It was April. And China annually have a very important domestic political event called Two Sessions. And in this year's Two Sessions, they proposed again that they have to make an effort to build healthy and steady relations between United States and China. And actually, it's totally different from last year's Two Sessions atmosphere because they didn't mention such a thing last year. But this year, they start to think about the healthy relations between two countries. So there was some changes, truly. So I think the reopening this high-level communication is kind of natural process of those two countries' relations. And moreover, now this COVID-19 situation is almost finishing in the world. So no more excuse of no coming and going between countries, and the people in every country start to keep complaining about economic depression. But there's no more excuse of COVID-19 now. So, and now China's domestic situation actually stabilized down compared to the beginning of this year. So they want to reach it to their needs for the booming economy, and it must be a great timing for the negotiation is started.
Right, I see. That being said, given that global economic stability is one of the items the two countries are feeling the need to work on together, how would economic cooperation between the U.S. and China look? I mean, could each country's export controls and sanctions be eased in any way?
Well, yeah, you're right. For the economic stability for global economy, or the economic recovery for each country, especially United States and China, relieving tension must be very important. Well, let's say from the United States side, they got high inflation now, and they also need to rebuild the stable global supply chain for the whole global economy, and at the same time, U.S. themselves. So they need to cooperate with China for these matters. So even if there was a serious U.S.-China competition until last year, the last year's trade volume between two countries actually was increased more than 12%. We all know that. And that shows U.S.-China economic dependence with each other. But I would say fundamentally says ease the recent tension is not, let's say, would not be highly possible because U.S. and China got different needs to each other. So if the relations between U.S. and China improve, the major reason must be economy. But even in this economic factor, they got different ideas, I mean, U.S. and China. And from China's side, the reason why they want to build a strong relationship with the United States, they want to cooperate with them, is because they want to develop a high technology, so-called DNA. This is Chinese term of data, network, and AI. So they want to develop such an industry, and they're really focusing on it. And there's another classical issue of the semiconductor that's also a high technology. So they want to get help from the United States to develop such an industry. But unfortunately, U.S. has no idea to do so. We saw that recently, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said, U.S. going to protect foundational technology. And he said a small yard and high fence. And what yard means is a high technology. And he even said they're going to build a higher fence on that. So it's totally different needs from China and United States, what they think is so different. And meanwhile, what United States want from China, to be honest, they want a cheap manufacturing base, just like what China did in the last 1980s or 1990s, to be a factory of the world. The United States wants China to keep doing that. It's totally different from what China wants. And they still want to use this with low labor cost, a lack of knowledge about environmental protection or management ethics. So the ideas are so different of those two countries. And I think the relief of export controls and sanctions, I think we need to wait and see how the things turn out.
Right, I see. So we'll have to wait and see, but the chances are low that the export controls and sanctions will be eased because the two countries have different economic goals. Now, Professor Pyo, amid efforts to, improve such tensions, U.S. President Joe Biden called his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping a dictator while talking about the spy balloon incident from earlier this year. And to this, of course, China responded with quite an outrage. How would this in any way affect bilateral relations?
Well, to be honest, I don't think it would affect a lot. Yes, just you said, President Biden called Xi Jinping as a dictator. And yes, Biden thinks Chinese recent system is a dictatorship or authoritarianism. That's the truth. That's what Biden thinks about China. And he thinks President Xi Jinping is a dictator. And the more important thing is Xi Jinping knows I don't think so. So even the two countries are starting their communication or reopening the high communication status right now, basically for this economical interest of each country. But it's hard to imagine that it would expand to some security issues. Well, this time Blinken visited Beijing and he talked about lots of things on security issues. But he himself said that he failed to restoring military-to-military communication with China, because now their interest or issues agenda focus more on economic issues than the security. So President Biden or President Xi Jinping, I think, are not that idealistic to expect to gain each other's understanding or empathy on the value systems or ideology. Well, we know the United States still think China is a dictatorship country. And actually, China thinks the United States is a hegemonism or imperialism. So I would think they won't be seriously upset by such comment to each other or be provoked, because it's not unexpected situation or idea. Of course, there's some certain, let's say, reaction, but fundamentally, it's not something new or provoked. So it won't be effect on the matter of their easing tension or the bigger issues.
Right, I see. So though the two countries are trying to improve the bilateral ties because they have the same economic interests, the need to find solutions, active cooperation would be difficult for the two countries because they have so many differences between the two. Now, I'd like to also focus on spillover effects of Blinken's visit to China, Professor. How is this risk management efforts between the two countries going to impact South Korea's position? I mean, Seoul has been, facing dilemmas of walking this fine line between the two countries, and now they are trying to improve their ties, right? So what potential spillover could we see?
Well, actually, it's a very important question, especially for us, because the people around us keep talking about this issue for the past days, and it's really important for us. We also have the bilateral relations with China, and actually it's kind of not easy, honestly, that is tough. So we should talk about this issue, but above all, we would have to weigh up what is risk management, because I mentioned today several times that recent situation cannot just say simply a lessening competition, especially not lessening of strategic competition, because I also said that two countries reopening communication, the main object or purpose must be economic interest. And we all know the difference between those gaps of what they want of two countries and the security issues and values is more and more, the gap is even bigger. So this time Blinken's visit, they failed to revive the military-to-military talks with China, which was one of the key agenda with that. And I think that proves it, how fundamentally the managing the risk, including the security risk, is so important, but it's very difficult. Then it does not seem to be that U.S. and China relations totally improved. And I wouldn't think that Korea will be in kind of weird situation or hard situation or even an embarrassed situation, as who relatively already have some conflict or competition with, let's say conflict, not competition, conflict with China, as some people just professed. Because right now, conflict between China and Korea, I think the bilateral issues are bigger, more than the structural issues, including this U.S.-China competition. And we all know that we saw lots of the polls that more than 90% of Koreans have a critical view or pessimistic view on China or the attitude of China, how they deal with the situation with Korea, politically and economically. So even if the relations between U.S. and China will be improved, it is hard to imagine that Koreans think on China would be dramatically changed at once. But there's still good things like ease the burdens on it definitely will be ease the burden on Korea-China cooperation, such as we'll have less situations that we have to consider both sides, what they think on some sensitive matters, including DPRK. And at the same time, there's some good things on the economic issues, like we have lots of investment to China or enterprises. They can reduce risk of insecurity, and this relieves enterprises much of anxiety. And at the same time, when we have a communication with United States or China, I mean, as a bilaterally, from our point of view, the more important things on this district region is how to deal with these security things, including North Korea. So we can more focus on this North Korean agenda when we communicate to these great countries.
Right, I see. So our focus should be on North Korean issue. Now, Professor Pyo, before I let you go, I'd like to ask you this last question. Now, all eyes are now on whether Biden and Xi will hold their second summit sometime this year, perhaps in November at the APEC summit meeting. What are the chances, in your opinion?
About this question, I cannot give you the very correct answer because I'm not belong to U.S. or China government, and I belong to Korean government. But there must be a very high possibility to United States will invite China, President Xi Jinping, because Xi Jinping have not visited United States since President Biden took office. So United States would like to push Xi Jinping's visit forward for sure. But, there's still another possibility, like, according to our diplomatic custom, President Xi Jinping already visited United States in 2017. It was still his term. And maybe now is the time for United States to visit China. So it's like take turns of these high-level visits. And China goes to the States at the second time. Maybe there's some conversations or issues in their inner domestic policy. But always, this is, I think, still, this is easier decision for China compared to President Xi Jinping just visit to United States only for bilateral talks. This time anyway, he's going to participate in an international conference that's APEC. So it'll be much lighter burden to make decisions for China's side. So I think the President Xi Jinping's visit to DC would be decided under all this consideration. And also they have another chance to meet each other in September. In India, there's this year's G20 summit, so casually they also can meet. So maybe they're going to take that chance, and we'll talk about the next visit in November to the States.
All right, we'll just have to wait and see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Pyo, for your insights.
Thank you very much for inviting.
We really appreciate it. See you again.
See you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
What can I say?